Carl Jung uncovered 7 psychological landscapes that obliterate 90% of individuals' mental fortitude. These aren't tangible locations. They're cognitive snares you walk into daily without awareness. Most individuals spend years within these environments wondering why they feel exhausted, worried, or confused. They criticize themselves. But Jung understood the reality. Specific environments actually restructure your brain to function against you. In 1961, Jung worked with a patient who appeared completely healthy, but was gradually deteriorating mentally. Jung tracked the issue to 7 particular psychological territories this individual occupied regularly. When Jung assisted him in identifying and abandoning these mental snares, his patient underwent complete transformation. Today, I'll reveal precisely which locations are damaging your psyche, how to identify when you're caught within them, and Jung's liberation method that can preserve your sanity. Because what Jung revealed about these hazardous territories will transform how you perceive every relationship, every environment, and every choice for your entire life. But before we continue, please like this video, share it with people who might find it valuable, and write in the comments which city you're watching our YouTube channel from. The primary and most hazardous location Jung identified is the resonance chamber, where every voice surrounding you reflects your own thoughts, convictions, and prejudices back until they seem like absolute reality. Jung's patient devoted hours daily in social organizations and political meetings where everyone shared his precise perspectives, anxieties about societal transformations, and hostility toward specific groups. He believed he was staying educated, but Jung realized he was becoming psychologically contaminated. Here's what occurs to your mind in a resonance chamber. Your neural connections actually deteriorate. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's studies at UCLA demonstrate that when you're never confronted, your analytical thinking abilities weaken like unused muscles. Jung termed this group possession. When collective reasoning replaces personal thought, the patient ceased questioning anything because questioning seemed like disloyalty. His perspective became inflexible, delicate, and afraid of alternative viewpoints. The warning indicators you're caught in a resonance chamber. You can anticipate what everyone around you will express about any subject. Alternative opinions seem personally threatening rather than intellectually stimulating. You've ceased asking, what if I'm incorrect about your fundamental beliefs? Your discussions strengthen rather than question your reasoning. Jung discovered that individuals in resonance chambers don't simply stop developing. They begin contracting. Their minds become smaller, more frightened, and more reliant on the collective for psychological security. But this is merely the start of how these locations destroy you, because resonance chambers make you mentally vulnerable. Consequently, you become susceptible to the second hazardous location, the evaluation battlefield, where your value is assessed against everyone else's accomplishments and position. Jung's patient, already weakened from resonance chamber reasoning, began obsessively evaluating his existence to others in his social environment. Every achievement story from acquaintances seemed like personal defeat. Every accomplishment seemed pointless because someone else had achieved more. Dr. Rachel Kaliger's studies at the University of the West of England confirm what Jung witnessed. Continuous evaluation literally reduces the prefrontal cortex, the brain section responsible for self-esteem and decision-making. Here's the psychological snare. Evaluation doesn't inspire you to advance. It conditions your brain to discover inadequacy everywhere. Jung called this the expansion-contraction pattern. You either feel superior or inferior, never simply yourself. The patient informed Jung, "I received a promotion at work, but all I could consider was how my college friend became CEO quicker. His accomplishments became pointless because they weren't comparative victories." Warning indicators you're caught in the evaluation battlefield. Other individuals' achievement makes you feel like a failure. You reach objectives but feel hollow because someone performed better. You modify your existence to match what appears successful rather than what feels correct. Your contentment depends on being ahead of others. Jung realized this location is especially deadly because it separates you from your own principles and aspirations. You cease pursuing what brings you happiness and begin chasing what brings acknowledgement. But the third location is even more cunning. Before we proceed, you must understand the science behind why these locations are so hazardous. Contemporary neuroscience has validated Jung's observations about environmental psychology. Dr. Daniel Siegel's studies show that toxic psychological environments activate chronic cortisol discharge, which actually reduces your hippocampus, the brain area responsible for memory and emotional control. But here's what Jung comprehended before neuroscience could validate it. These locations don't just harm you temporarily. They restructure your default mental condition. Spend sufficient time in toxic psychological environments and your brain begins recreating their patterns even when you're isolated. Jung's patient developed what neuroscientists now term learned powerlessness. His brain had been conditioned by these environments to anticipate failure, criticism, and inadequacy. Even in secure spaces, he couldn't unwind because his neural pathways had been shaped by psychological danger. This is why Jung stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your existence and you will call it destiny." These locations program your unconscious mind to function against you. The most disturbing aspect, most individuals don't realize they're being programmed because the damage occurs slowly, subtly, below conscious recognition. The third hazardous location Jung identified is the acting stage, where genuineness is penalized and you're compensated only for wearing the correct facade. Jung's patient worked in a corporate setting where displaying any weakness was career destruction. He learned to laugh at jokes that weren't amusing, support ideas he disagreed with, and conceal any aspect of himself that didn't match the company atmosphere. Jung called this persona identification, when the facade you wear becomes the only identity you acknowledge. The patient told Jung, "I don't understand who I am anymore. I've been acting for so long that the genuine me seems like a foreigner." This location is psychologically deadly because it conditions you to abandon yourself slowly. Each compromise seems minor, but they accumulate into complete self-betrayal. Dr. Christine Neff's studies on self-compassion demonstrate that individuals caught in acting stages develop severe internal critics. They internalize the harsh criticism of these environments and transport it everywhere. Warning indicators you're in an acting stage. You feel drained after social exchanges, not energized. You catch yourself supporting things you don't accept. You're afraid to express opinions that might be controversial. You feel like you're wearing a disguise that you can't remove. Your genuine thoughts and emotions seem hazardous or unsuitable. The patient described it perfectly. "I became so skilled at being what others desired that I forgot what I desired. And when I attempted to remember, there was nothing there." Jung realized this location doesn't just conceal your authentic self. It eliminates it layer by layer, compromise by compromise until you're an empty performance with no center. Because acting stages teach you to hide your genuine self. Consequently, you become caught in the fourth hazardous location, the quiet endurance space where emotional requirements are buried under the fantasy of stability. Jung encountered this continuously in his practice. Patients from perfect families where love was assumed but never demonstrated, where problems were ignored rather than confronted, where maintaining appearances mattered more than genuine connection. The patient Jung treated originated from precisely this type of family. "We never argued," he told Jung, "but we never really communicated either. I learned that having requirements was selfish and expressing pain was weakness." This space creates what Jung called emotional starvation. Your emotional requirements don't vanish when ignored. They decay in the unconscious, creating anxiety, depression, and unexplainable emptiness. Dr. Sue Johnson's studies on attachment demonstrate that emotional suppression in relationships actually disrupts the nervous system. Your body remains in a state of chronic stress because your emotional requirements are continuously unmet. The most hazardous aspect of this location is how ordinary it seems. The patient told Jung, "I thought we were a close family because we never had conflict. I didn't realize that avoiding conflict also meant avoiding intimacy." Warning indicators you're caught in quiet endurance. You feel isolated even when surrounded by individuals. You've learned to manage pain rather than heal from it. Requesting emotional support seems selfish or weak. You have intense emotions, but nowhere secure to express them. Peace in your relationships seems fragile, like it could break if you're too honest. Jung discovered that individuals in this space develop a profound disconnection from their own emotional reality. They know something is incorrect but can't identify it because identifying it would violate the family or group's unspoken regulations. The fifth hazardous location is the exact opposite of silence. The turbulence hurricane, where constant mental stimulation overwhelms your inner voice until you can't hear yourself think. Jung's patient existed in this condition continuously. Newspapers demanding his focus, radio programs feeding anxiety, social gatherings draining his energy, work demands following him home. He filled every quiet moment with reading, conversation, or activity because silence seemed unbearable. But Jung realized this wasn't preference. It was avoidance. The patient was afraid of what he might discover in stillness: unresolved pain, difficult decisions, or aspects of himself he didn't want to confront. Dr. Adam Gazzaley's studies at UCSF demonstrate that chronic mental stimulation actually impairs your ability to form coherent thoughts and make clear decisions. Your prefrontal cortex becomes overwhelmed and begins making impulsive choices just to reduce cognitive burden. Jung called this psychological fragmentation, when your attention is so scattered that you lose the ability to integrate experiences into wisdom. The patient consumed enormous amounts of information but couldn't make sense of any of it. Here's the snare. Turbulence becomes addictive. Your brain adapts to high stimulation and begins craving more intense input to feel ordinary. Quiet moments activate anxiety because your nervous system has forgotten how to self-regulate. Warning indicators you're caught in the turbulence hurricane. Silence makes you immediately reach for a book, newspaper, or turn on the radio. You have strong opinions about everything, but deep understanding of nothing. You feel busy, but can't remember what you accomplished. Slowing down activates anxiety rather than peace. You consume information continuously, but feel empty inside. The patient told Jung, "I stay busy because when I stop, all the things I'm avoiding catch up with me, but I'm so tired of running." Because the turbulence hurricane teaches you to avoid your inner voice. Consequently, you become vulnerable to the sixth hazardous location, the self-betrayal chamber, where you systematically ignore your own requirements, instincts, and truth. This is the most insidious location because it occurs slowly. You say yes when everything inside screams no. You remain in relationships that drain you because leaving seems harder than enduring. You choose comfort over genuineness, safety over development. Jung's patient described it perfectly. "I became so skilled at ignoring my gut instincts that I stopped having them. I made every decision based on what others expected, what seemed practical, or what would avoid conflict." Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's studies on trauma demonstrate that chronic self-betrayal actually disconnects you from your body's wisdom. You lose the ability to recognize what you require, desire, or feel because those signals have been consistently overridden. Jung called this soul loss, not a mystical concept, but a psychological reality where you become estranged from your own core self. The patient said, "I felt like I was living someone else's existence. I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision based on what I actually wanted." This location is particularly hazardous because it masquerades as maturity, responsibility, or selflessness. Society often rewards self-betrayal, making it harder to recognize as a problem. Warning indicators you're in the self-betrayal chamber. You can't remember the last time you checked in with your own emotions. Your decisions are based on what's expected rather than what feels correct. You've stopped having preferences about things that used to matter to you. You feel like you're living on autopilot. When someone asks what you want, you genuinely don't know. Jung realized this location creates a terrifying emptiness. The patient told him, "I succeeded at everything I was supposed to want, but I felt completely hollow inside. I didn't know who I was beneath all the shoulds and have-tos." The seventh and most hazardous location Jung identified exists entirely within your own mind. The darkness cellar where you've locked away aspects of yourself you're too afraid or ashamed to confront. Jung's patient had spent years avoiding this internal space. Every time painful memories, shameful thoughts, or difficult emotions emerged, he pushed them down into what Jung called the personal unconscious. But Jung discovered something terrifying. What you bury doesn't stay buried. It grows stronger in the darkness, influencing your behavior in ways you don't understand. The patient found himself sabotaging relationships, overreacting to minor offenses, and repeating patterns he swore he'd never repeat. Dr. Peter Levine's studies on trauma demonstrate that unprocessed emotional content actually lives in your nervous system, creating chronic dysregulation until it's consciously integrated. Jung called this darkness possession, when the aspects of yourself you've rejected begin controlling your existence from the unconscious. The patient told Jung, "I became everything I hate about my father, but I couldn't see it happening until the damage was done." The darkness cellar is hazardous because avoidance gives these rejected aspects more power, not less. They manifest as projection, addiction, sudden rage, or unexplainable self-sabotage. But here's what Jung discovered. The darkness also contains tremendous power and creativity. The patient's anger, once integrated consciously, became passionate advocacy. His sadness became deep empathy. His shame became fierce compassion for others struggling with similar issues. Warning indicators you're avoiding the darkness cellar. You have strong emotional reactions that surprise you. You repeat relationship patterns despite knowing better. You judge others harshly for traits you secretly fear in yourself. You have persistent anxiety or depression with no clear cause. You feel like you're fighting an invisible enemy inside yourself. Jung realized that healing requires descending into the cellar not with self-judgment but with curiosity and compassion. Now that you can recognize these 7 hazardous locations, how do you escape them? Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to psychological freedom. Step 1. Conscious recognition. You can't leave a location you don't know you're in. Jung's patient had to honestly assess which of these environments he inhabited daily. This requires brutal honesty without self-judgment. Step 2. Environmental audit. Examine every space you regularly enter, physical and digital. Jung taught that awareness transforms unconscious influence into conscious choice. Ask yourself, does this environment help me grow or keep me small? Step 3. Strategic withdrawal. You don't need to abandon your existence, but you must limit exposure to toxic psychological environments. Jung's patients started with small changes, limiting time in toxic social circles, setting boundaries with negative individuals, creating daily periods of solitude and reflection. Step 4. Conscious integration. This is where Jung's approach becomes revolutionary. Instead of just avoiding negative environments, you must consciously create positive ones. Seek out individuals who challenge you kindly, environments that support development, spaces where genuineness is valued. Step 5. Darkness work. Jung believed that until you confront what you've hidden in the darkness cellar, you'll unconsciously recreate toxic patterns everywhere you go. This requires therapy, journaling, or other methods of bringing unconscious content into awareness. Step 6. Regular maintenance. Jung discovered that psychological freedom requires ongoing vigilance. These hazardous locations are seductive because they offer false comfort, easy belonging, or familiar patterns. You must consciously choose development over comfort, truth over convenience. The patient told Jung after 6 months, "I didn't realize how much mental energy I was spending in those toxic spaces. Now that I've left them, I feel like I have my mind back." Jung documented remarkable transformations when individuals escaped these psychological snares. His patient's story became a blueprint for thousands of others seeking mental freedom. Within 3 months of leaving the resonance chamber, the patient's critical thinking improved dramatically. He started questioning his assumptions, seeking diverse perspectives, and making decisions based on evidence rather than groupthink. After escaping the evaluation battlefield, he discovered interests and objectives that were genuinely his own. He stopped measuring his worth against others and started pursuing work that aligned with his principles rather than his image. Leaving the acting stage was harder because it required disappointing individuals who preferred his facade to his authentic self. But Jung taught him that relationships based on false performance aren't real relationships at all. The quiet endurance space required learning entirely new communication skills. The patient had to practice expressing requirements, setting boundaries, and requesting support, skills his family had never modeled. Escaping the turbulence hurricane meant developing tolerance for stillness, boredom, and the anxiety that initially arose in quiet moments. But Jung knew that wisdom only emerges in contemplative space. The self-betrayal chamber required the scariest change, making decisions based on his own truth rather than external expectations. This meant disappointing some individuals, but it also meant finally living authentically. The darkness cellar work was ongoing, but each integration made him more whole, more compassionate, and less likely to project his issues onto others. Jung observed that individuals who escape these locations don't just feel better. They become different individuals entirely. Their relationships improve. Their decision-making clarifies, and they develop what Jung called psychological sovereignty. What Jung discovered about his patient's transformation reveals something profound about psychological environments. When you change your relationship to these spaces, you change the spaces themselves. The patient's family initially resisted his new boundaries and emotional honesty. They tried to pull him back into quiet endurance because his development threatened their familiar patterns. But Jung taught him to maintain his changes with compassion, not aggression. Gradually, his genuineness gave others permission to be real. His sister started expressing her own long-buried emotions. His father admitted to depression he'd hidden for decades. The family system began healing because one individual refused to participate in dysfunction. At work, the patient stopped performing and started contributing authentically. Some colleagues felt threatened, but others were inspired. He discovered that authentic leadership was more powerful than performance-based people-pleasing. Jung called this the ripple effect of individuation. When you stop participating in toxic psychological patterns, you force those patterns to either evolve or dissolve. The patient told Jung, "I thought changing myself would make me lonely, but it actually attracted individuals who wanted real connection. I traded many relationships for a few meaningful ones, and it was the best exchange I ever made." This is Jung's ultimate insight about these hazardous locations. They persist because we collectively agree to inhabit them. But when enough individuals choose psychological freedom, the collective environment transforms. Remember Jung's original discovery. 90% of individuals' mental strength is destroyed by these 7 psychological environments. But now you know something most individuals don't. You can choose differently. Jung's patient started as a man slowly losing his mind in spaces that felt ordinary, even comfortable. He ended as someone who had reclaimed his psychological sovereignty and helped others do the same. The 7 hazardous locations Jung identified aren't just abstract concepts. They're real psychological environments you encounter every day. The resonance chamber that confirms your prejudices while weakening your mind. The evaluation battlefield that makes your achievements pointless. The acting stage that rewards fake and penalizes real. The quiet endurance space that buries your requirements under false peace. The turbulence hurricane that drowns your inner voice in noise. The self-betrayal chamber where you betray yourself slowly. And the darkness cellar where you lock away aspects of your soul. But Jung also showed us the way out. Not through escape or avoidance, but through conscious recognition, strategic choices, and the courage to develop beyond what's comfortable. The patient Jung treated in 1961 went on to become a therapist himself, helping others recognize and escape these same psychological snares. He understood that mental strength isn't about avoiding difficulty. It's about choosing which difficulties serve your development. Jung's final lesson. These locations will always exist and they'll always be seductive. Resonance chambers offer easy belonging. Evaluation battlefields promise motivation. Acting stages provide approval. Quiet endurance feels like peace. Turbulence hurricanes distract from pain. Self-betrayal avoids conflict. Darkness cellars hide shame. But true mental strength comes from choosing development over comfort, genuineness over approval, and consciousness over convenience. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these hazardous locations. You will. The question is, will you recognize them when you do? Will you have the courage to leave? And will you create the kind of psychological environment where others can be free too? Jung believed that the future of human consciousness depends on individuals brave enough to choose psychological freedom over collective unconsciousness. That choice starts with recognizing where you are right now and deciding where you want to be. Your mind is not your enemy, but the locations you allow it to inhabit might be. Which of these 7 hazardous locations have you spent too much time in? Share your recognition in the comments. Sometimes naming where we've been is the first step towards psychological freedom. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights that can transform your relationship with your own mind. If you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological transformation, check out my video on the most hazardous Carl Jung psychology sign, Stay Alert, where I reveal the warning signs that indicate someone is projecting their unconscious darkness onto you and why immediate withdrawal might be your only protection. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.